Okay, as already introduced, I'm from CWIS and looking at integrity for inclusive urban sanitation from a regulator's perspective. Next. So my presentation outline will focus on what the current status of the sanitation sector is in the Eastern and Southern African region, and how, as regulators, we're intending to change the status quo. Then I'll also highlight some brief tools that have been developed and some under development for enhancing integrity. Next. Okay, so globally, it has been estimated that between 2.1 and 2.6 billion people people in low and middle income countries actually rely on on-site technologies. From the CWIS region, when we looked at our own figures, we realized that sanitation coverage by sewer network is really estimated at less than 15% of the urban population, which leaves over 15 million people on non-sewered or on-site technologies. So what has been our experience in the sanitation sector? We know that this has been characterized by a number of things. One is being fragmented institutional setup. So who takes responsibility? You know, we don't really know who is responsible. In some instances, we don't even know who is accountable. If you can't have a responsible entity, then it is difficult to also have that entity accountable. There are a lot of actors in the sanitation sector. So we see a multiplicity of actors. And again, where does the buck stop? There is no coordination. Who do you then call to discuss certain issues? Who do you then call if there are elements of integrity that need to be reinforced? There is illegal dumping. This is really characterized by lack of enforcement and therefore leading to very high pollution in a number of areas. And we see disease outbreak caused by this. Prices are unregulated. Up to date, especially for non-sewered. Sewered, yes, to some extent, but for non-sewered services, this has really been market-driven. And we find that it has been quite unaffordable for most, especially the poor, to afford these services. And this has led to a lot of conniving with responsible institutions just to get a certain service. There is no service delivery or quality standards. When there's no regulation, you have also an absence of consumer voice. So the consumer may not know at the end of the day what to demand from a service provider, and even from whom. Who do you report a service provider to if there are no quality standards? What do you demand when you don't know what to expect in terms of the quality of service? Then the sector has been largely characterized by lack of investment. The existing infrastructure which is there is quite limited and serves only a few. That is in terms of the sewer network. And if we say that the majority of the population is on non-sewer sanitation, and we have said over 50 million, but then who is looking after the interest of the majority? Who speaks for them? Who is ensuring that they're getting quality service? Next. As regulators, we came together, the Eastern and Southern Africa region regulators, and we said we need to do something about sanitation, especially the non-sewered sanitation. So we have developed a framework for regulating sanitation, and we are saying we can make a difference through regulation. So we have identified responsible institutions at various levels. So at policy levels, there's 4 institutions that have been identified, and we are recommended that there should be a ministry responsible for water and sanitation or sewerage to formulate policy. At regulation level, there should be a regulator for water supply and sanitation. And this regulator issues licenses for both sewered and non-sewered services. So we are saying there should be a single authority at the service provision level that is responsible for service provision for both sewered and non-sewered. This single authority can also outsource the service to the private sector and community-based organizations. And in this way, if you look on the far left of the screen, you will see that we have an accountability system. So this private sector and community-based would be accountable to the overall licensed authority, which is the service provider, who then is accountable through the regulator to the policymakers. And in this way, we are trying to enhance integrity in the sector. Next. In ensuring that we have institutions that are responsible, we have also defined their responsibilities across the whole sanitation chain, from capture to disposal and reuse. So you can see at policy level where policy should cover, which is across the whole sanitation chain. When it comes to regulation, we recognize there are other regulators apart from the water supply and sanitation regulator. We have the environmental agency, water resources, the local government, all who have clearly defined responsibilities across the sanitation chain. When you have clear responsibilities, there is potential for strong accountability as well. Similarly, at the service provision level, the responsibilities across the chain of the different stakeholders up to households and customers have also been defined. Next. We are in the process of developing some tools and have developed others. So what is in place at the moment are guidelines for sanitation services, tariff setting and models. As I said earlier, in most cases, what customers pay has been unregulated. So we want to change that and ensure that we have a guideline that stipulates how tariffs are set for both sewer and non-sewer sanitation and how that is regulated across the sector. We also have guidelines for citywide inclusive sanitation planning, which includes community participation and stakeholder engagement. How do you get the consumer voice into the sanitation service chain? How do you deal with gender issues? How do you deal with social inclusion issues to ensure that there is an element of integrity, there is systems that support good quality service provision? Next. We have also developed a CWIS SAP tool. This is Service Assessment Planning Tool, which aims to support regulators, utilities, and other authorities to achieve 3 key sector outcomes, which are equity, safety, and sustainability. This is a resource planning tool that helps stakeholders to look at an investment and decide where the investment would have the best impact. We know that in most cases, when investments are made into the sanitation sector, it has been skewed to sewer services, which only serve a few, and in most cases, the elite. So in trying to balance out to say, how do we cater for the needs of everybody? We have implemented this CWIS tool, which allows us to look at the hardware, the revenue, and the service delivery model in order to achieve those 3 outcomes. Also under development is a service reporting application, which will enable real-time reporting of the service quality by consumers for regulatory monitoring. So for the non-sewer side, consumers will be able to say if they have had emptying services, if any fecal sludge has been transported out of their environment. And at the end of the day, we will be able to trace and see if indeed consumers have a voice and they can feed into regulatory monitoring of the service on the ground. So that is our brief presentation from the regulatory side. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Yvonne, for the very informative presentation. And those who would like to find out a little bit more about the CWIS tool, you can go to the session page. Under the Files tab, you'll find the relevant files. Now we'll move on to the facilitated discussion part of our session, moderated by Chola Bilima from Enwasco. Chola is water and sanitation regulator with 15 years of experience working with the National Water Supply and Sanitation Council in Enwasco. Her focus is primarily on policy, governance, and economic regulation. Chola has been part of the reforms in sanitation in Zambia, guiding both service delivery and regulation models. Over to you, Chola.
Thank you so much, and hello to all our participants. Yvonne, thank you for that very enlightening presentation. So we want to discuss a little bit about what has been happening in the urban on-site sanitation space. And with me, I have Bill Twyman, who is a water and sanitation consultant from Agua Consult. He will be speaking to us about issues related to integrity in the sanitation subsector. And also joining me is Mpo Sitole. Mpo is a community leader, and he will be giving us perspectives from a community point of view with regards to sanitation, particularly in the informal settlements. And then I also have Elena Porter from WaterAid. Elena is a senior policy analyst, and she will also be giving us perspectives from her work point of view with regards to integrity in the informal settlements. So welcome, colleagues, and please say hello to the participants. So to get into the session, let me just start with Bill. Bill, I know that you've been doing some work in Zambia regarding, regulation in the urban sanitation space. So I just want you to share with the participants what the progress has been in Zambia. What progress has Zambia made in regulating urban sanitation, and what further interventions can be made in that regard? Bill.
Thanks, Joel, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today and engaging on this very important topic. And it's great to be here and to have these discussions. So in the study that Chola mentioned, we really looked at this kind of overarching question about the progress that has been made strengthening urban sanitation regulation in Zambia from kind of three overarching angles. Firstly, we kind of looked at the institutional arrangements for regulating urban sanitation services. We then looked at the preventive and corrective regulatory tools that different regulatory actors have at their disposal. And finally, we looked at kind of the overall strength or robustness of the regulatory environment in Zambia, specifically pertaining to urban sanitation regulation. And what we found is that for each of these three kind of overarching areas that I'll run through in a second, considerable progress has been made in Zambia. However, unsurprisingly, and as I think we would all expect for a lower middle income country, we also saw that there are key areas where further improvements are required moving forwards. So looking first at the institutional arrangements for regulating urban sanitation services, I would very much say that impressive steps have been taken in Zambia to consolidate legislative and policy frameworks to focus explicitly on sanitation and shift away from the water supply bias that there was in the sector. And I think it's fair to say that Zambia now has well-established institutional arrangements for urban sanitation regulation with clearly defined roles and responsibilities within between the different actors in the sector. Additionally, I think on this side of things, it's particularly important to note that since 2018, a series of steps have been taken to begin regulating the off-site sanitation services that, as Yvonne mentioned earlier, serve around 80 to 85% of people within the CWIS region and also within Zambia, especially in urban areas. I don't think I've got time to go into those kind of arrangements in detail here, but I think if we're looking at the areas that might need to be strengthened or improved moving forward, it's likely going to be in relation to kind of fine-tuning the difficulties that can be expected to emerge with the development or implementation of any new institutional arrangement.
Thank you, Bill, for that. Let me move on to Paul now. Paul, I know that you're coming from a community and you've been very instrumental in mobilizing communities around issues of water supply and sanitation to be able to enable better service delivery. So Paul, just share with us your experiences. What ways can you use to effectively mobilize communities around better water supply and sanitation services? Paul.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. My name is Mpo Sitole from Tsakane Extension 21. My effective ways for communities, as you know that we are in informal settlements, Emikukwini in Sizulu. So for us to know that to get water and sanitation, it's for us to know how many toilets do we have, how many taps do we have, which department or which people must we go to get those water. So if we do that, mostly it's the councillors that help us and water and sanitation, because in our municipality, local departments, we have water and sanitation in those departments. So in my experience, I've tried that with the help of an NGO that is Plan Act, in teaching us or workshopping us to know our rights as we are living in informal settlements, and also knowing that we must know which doors to knock in. So far, we've done a great job working with the councillor and also working with the water and sanitation department in Nigel. So far, we've got 2 kinds of toilets in our area. We've got chemical toilets and also flush container toilets. So this is how we do find our way to water and sanitation. And we also have 12 taps here in our area.
Thank you so much, Paul. One thing I pick from you is that we must know which doors to knock on, which I think is a very important aspect. Now, I'll get back to you, Bill, and you know, I want you to drill a little bit more in this you know, work that you did. And I want you to just you know, tell us what type of corruption and integrity failures you were able to identify in the urban sanitation sector. And perhaps you can also go a little bit into how these affect service delivery.
Yeah, thank you, Chiola. So I think while important progress has been made in Zambia, kind of developing these institutional arrangements and also doing lots of work to put in place kind of a preventive tools that we need to limit, I think, rather than completely prevent corruption and integrity failures, and to strengthen the regulatory environment, we did still find a wide range of different types of corruption and integrity failures in our study looking at these instances, really focused on Lusaka. To begin with, I would say we found these wide range of different types of corruption and integrity failures, despite the fact that we know from some global studies and global indicators that there's actually believed to be less corruption in Zambia than many other sub-Saharan countries, for example. So the 2 main instances of corruption that we found, and these are broadly similar to what you'd expect to see in the urban water supply sector, are corruption in public financial management and corruption at the citizen to institution interface. So public financial management corruption, this covers several different forms, spanning issues in procurement processes, smaller scale accounting fraud, for example, abusive demands for per diems, businesses paying bribes, for example. And of these, I would say, I think by far, corruption in procurement processes for large developmental programs focused on expanding and improving sanitation services in Lusaka were the most alarming instance that we came across. And this was kind of flagged by all the different stakeholders that we spoke with instances ranging from smaller scale issues such as manipulating comparatively small program activities that local NGOs and private sector actors are bidding for, up to much larger and much more concerning instances of corruption in the procurement processes of several large externally funded WASH programs. In addition, just quickly, we also saw several examples of corruption at the citizen to institution interface, which center on the bribery of public officials by private citizens. And I think of these, I would say bribery to obtain a service appears to be the most common. And in one instance, for example, we would see utility employees assisting community members to illegally connect to the sewage system, for example. Unfortunately, it was beyond the scope of our work or our study to kind of quantify the extent. So I can't provide a kind of nice catch-all statistic detailing the impact of this form of corruption, but we did see quite a lot of evidence that it was actually less than what you might expect to see in the urban water supply sector. And there's quite a few examples of that I can give if helpful.
Thank you, Bill, for that. So at least we are able to pick a few of those, integrity failures that you were able to find. But maybe let's just get a little bit more into the details. And I'm coming to Alena now. Alena, I know you've been doing a lot of work as well with WaterAid. And I just want to get from you, Alena, what have we learned about water integrity? Basically drawing from your work in informal settlements in South Africa. Alena.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'm speaking largely from my experience with the Socio-Economic Rights Institute in South Africa, where we worked over a period of several years in a range of informal settlements in South Africa. Our paper, which is one of the background files linked to the session, draws on this work and on the informal settlement context in Kenya. I mean, I think overall what we saw was it was very clear working in informal settlement upgrading that government's efforts, particularly in South Africa, to reach those left behind showed very little evident attempt to build on the agency, self-organization and initiative of local residents. Instead, resources are targeted at doing too much by eradicating or relocating or redeveloping informal settlements, or by doing too little, by simply not acting to upgrade or to regulate or to monitor services or to support service providers in informal settlements. And both doing too much and doing too little violate the right to services. The single overlapping point of failure across all the settlements that we worked in was that the residents, who are sometimes called slum dwellers in the international terrain, were not recognized as legitimate participants of democratic or developmental engagement, or as legitimate consumers to whom government or service providers were accountable. Instead, they were actively delegitimized or even criminalized, including in their attempts to self-access services where no services were provided. So participation, inclusion, accountability, access to information, they were overlapping points of failure in the South Africa and the Kenyan cases, and exactly the place where water integrity really comes alive. So thank you.
Thank you, Alena, for that. So you mentioned issues of participation, inclusion, transparency, and so on. And I can only imagine how those issues affect a number of our African countries, looking at how similar our situations are. But maybe let me ask Paul, being a community leader herself, I mean, drawing from what you, Elena, has said, and also what Bill sort of highlighted. Paul, what must governments do really to stop this corruption and ensure that our so-called slum dwellers are also, recognized and are part and parcel of service delivery for water and sanitation? Paul.
First of all, I would like to say to what Anna said, it's true. We are not being recognized. Our rights are not being recognized. We fight to get what we have in our areas. Also about transparency and monitoring. Mostly government does not monitor his services or his draft of what he said on the IDP. Because we've got IDPs also that we live under, or we see that it's where we can say what we want in our services or in our wards. And also to finish corruption, our government does not monitor mostly, and it does not work hand in hand with us as communities. So if you are not working hand in hand with the community, how can you know what do we need or what is there in our area? Because they also don't come in our areas. They don't site visit the areas. And also, I would like to say we've worked with this NGO Plan Act with monitoring, facilitating other communities, seeing that they've got those services. It's been working for us. That's why we've created as Vigilantes that helps us, that we collect all the information from other communities so that water and sanitation can see that we need proper toilets, we need proper upgrading in our informal settlement, because they don't upgrade us. They just leave us there and say that we'll wait until they give us those houses. And we've been staying in those informal settlement more than 20 years. So there's no transparency in municipality. They don't monitor. They don't work hand in hand with us. So this is how they can stop corruption in municipality, because if they can work hand in hand with us, they can see how we are living and visit us and see the land that we are staying in. They can see, because even municipality in local, they don't come. So how can in provincial or national, because the national gives out the money, the province must make sure that the municipality uses the money properly. But the province don't come here. They come only when they want to see a bigger project, signing that project in. Then after then, we don't see them anymore. So this is how we are living in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. But I'll still pick on you. You mentioned this as Vigilante. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? What is that all about?
Okay, as Vigilante, it's all about us as communities. We've got a time that we get every week. We answer questions once a month. Those questions are regarding our places. That do we have water? Do they come and pick up a waste for us? Does municipality come to talk to us? Do we have cleaners in those toilets? These are those questions that they've been asking us, and it's been helping us a lot. Now it's been 2 years now, because last year we finished the year. So it started last year in March. Since the lockdown started, it's been helping us a lot, because it's how we can see how other communities suffer, and how we can help each other, and how our words can be heard in municipalities.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that. I think it's very much enlightening, and I'm personally learning a lot from that. Now I'm coming back to you, Anna. Anna, what do you think is the one thing that must change really if we have to improve services, particularly for the slum dwellers?
Okay, okay. So I mean, I think in practical terms, acting with integrity means attending first and foremost to the non-material needs of residents. Now, this seems really strange, because the big driver is obviously for material gains, for water, for sanitation, for land, for housing, for livelihoods. But in the years of our engagements with informal settlements, one of the clear things that residents said is, we want to be recognized as legitimate participants. We want to belong. We want to be engaged in a meaningful manner, to be humanized in our interactions, in the way that service providers provide service, in the way regulators regulate, in the way government engages with us, whether it's through councillors or through ward committees. It was so incredibly clear that what really matters is the manner in which people are treated, and the way in which they are involved in upgrading and in service provision, not just in the beginning, as Mama Paul said, but throughout the process. The services that we've seen in many informal settlements, including one in Cape Town, which is home to 60,000 people, called Marikana, many of these services are simply dumped into an open space, for example, container latrines, where people go and collect these containers and then go and use them. And there's a kind of anonymization, a lack of accountability, a lack of recognition, and of seeing people as not only legitimate participants, but as human beings. And then the kind of dignity of meaningful engagement is probably the most important part of service provision in informal settlements and upgrading, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. So, I mean, I pick that there are quite a couple of buzzwords here. The issue of participation is coming out prominently. Inclusion, transparency, and meaningful engagement of, the recipients of these services, for us to be able to address this issue of integrity failures. But maybe at this point, let me just get, some, take homes. Bill, I'm coming to you. What is your message that you want to send home to our participants in under a minute, Bill, please?
No, thank you very much, Chola. And I think very interesting to hear what Alana was talking about there, and something perhaps we can build on later in the Q&A session, because I think there's lots of examples of that from Zambia, but also all across sub-Saharan Africa, which would be of interest to the participants. In terms of my takeaway message, I think my real learning point from studying this topic was around the scope of the impact that integrity is having on urban sanitation service provision, which I think has been somewhat neglected in terms of our collective thinking in the wash sector. And secondly, that there really are a variety of different ways and best practices in terms of addressing this issue. As Alana mentioned, it's absolutely paramount that we put the users and citizens at the forefront, both in the implementation of projects and in ongoing service delivery. But there's also more top-down ways and from the regulator as well, be it through expanding e-procurement systems, be it putting in place mechanisms to strengthen per diem management, for example. And it really does require this holistic set of interventions, I think, if we're going to tackle all the different variety of forms of corruption and integrity failures that exist in the urban sanitation sector.
Thank you so much for that. Paul, I'm coming to you. What is the message that you want to drive home for our participants?
I want us to put in mind that even though we are staying in informal settlement, we are also human beings. We need also to stay in a better position. Sorry?
Go ahead, Paul, go ahead.
Okay, so that's the message I want to put in, that we must be recognized as people staying in informal settlement. We have to be hand in hand with any decision that the province or the national or the local departments are making decisions on behalf of us. We have to know and be part and parcel of those things. So we need better sanitation for us, because at night you cannot go to a communal toilet at night. It's not safe for us women, woman, and it's not safe for children. And we need toilets in our own homes. We need better life as we are staying in informal settlement till they give us our own homes. So that's the message I want to send out. Thank you.
Anna, can you just wrap up this, discussion for us? What is it that you want to give us as a takeaway message?
I mean, I think importantly, people have lives. People live where they live because they have economic and social networks. Informal settlement residents choose to live where they do because because they have access to social and cultural and economic amenities and to the ability to make a living. And in COVID, this has become even more important. Particularly informal food networks have become the only way in which many people are accessing food. And so I think the importance is upgrading people where they are, listening, understanding, and building whatever efforts to provide housing or services around the norms, the agency, and the practices that informal settlement residents have already established. The idea that informal settlements are places of lawlessness and disorder is often completely incorrect. People have established very clear norms and rules for how they operate together, and any attempt to engage or upgrade settlements must take this into account, must build on what exists, mustn't come in and pretend nothing exists. Just because it's not formally recognized or planned for. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you so much, my panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to leave a bit of some time for questions from the audience. So I will end this discussion here and allow us to get into our next session, which basically is going to be a question and answer session from our participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you indeed, and thank you, Chola, for moderating the discussion. So now we move on to questions from the audience. And actually, Chola, you may want to get your microphone back on because the first question comes to you, but I would address it also to all other speakers who may have something to say. So you have probably, in your experience in the sector, worked with various integrity management tools, various mechanisms to ensure accountability, to prevent corruption from hampering sanitation services. So what are some of these integrity management tools or mechanisms that you would highlight that you would perceive as very promising?
Thank you so much. I don't think I'll be among the ones that will be asked questions, but anyway, as you have rightly put it, I have indeed, worked with a number of these tools and instruments, and I think key among them, that I would want to highlight straight away is that, we need to have well-defined policies or manuals in place. Everything that we do has to be in black and white. So I think I want to emphasize on that most of the times these issues of integrity come in because people are not sure of what to do, or the procedures and processes of how to go about, for instance, acquiring a connection, or how much to pay for a service is not in black and white. So transparency, and this has to be done through the various manuals, and policies, and also these have to be reduced to the communities out there. So they need to understand the steps, what steps should we follow, how much should we pay, and so on and so forth. Then the other one that I would want to highlight again also is that we also need to have mechanisms for redress. So what can somebody do if they don't get a service, in good time? So we have to have those clear mechanisms that people can follow if they have a complaint, or if they want certain issues to be addressed which have not been addressed as per their expectation. And then also we need to have service charters. What is it that the customers, the communities should expect from us, so that they are able to demand value for money, or put us on the spot if we are not able to provide such services. So I will not go into too much detail. I think those three are the ones that I would prioritize. Thank you.
Thank you, Chola. And Ivan, if I may come to you, the question is, what is the role of the regulator in ensuring informal settlements are provided with adequate services, and that adequate budgets and resources are provided for that purpose?
Thank you, Umar Beck. Your name is so difficult. Okay, for the regulatory role, as I said also in my presentation, regulators put in place certain guidelines, they put in place certain instruments to ensure that service provision is inclusive. It must cater for all. So the role of the regulator is to enforce that service provision actually caters for everyone, including issues of business planning, investment planning. Regulators have put in place guidelines to ensure that when the service provider is developing those guidelines, is developing the business plans or developing the investment plans, that they are not leaving out any area, or even informal settlements, because that is a mandated or jurisdiction of the service provider. So the service provider cannot choose whether to service one section or the other. So that is the role of regulation in this case, to ensure inclusive services catering for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. The next question is for Mpo. Based on your experience, what do you think are some ways to encourage legislators to listen to the community, especially the people living in informal settlements, and really implement the necessary mechanisms to ensure much better wash services?
I think municipality has to start by working with community leaders and other NGOs that are monitoring service delivery, because what is important is to monitor what you give people. As I was hearing Yvonne saying that there are rules and regulations, the guidelines that they give them, ensuring that the service provider is giving us everything that we need. Yes, it's true, but do they monitor? Because most of the time you give people things, but you don't come back and monitor those things that are happening accordingly, because it's only us as communities that are monitoring those things, are following up that are they after, because they are giving them a 3-year contract as a service provider. Do they have cleaners? Do they take those cleaners to doctors because they are cleaning, toilets? So things like that. Do workers have contractors, contracts that they sign? Things like that, because they also sign contracts with municipality. So that's why we say it's important to monitor.
Thank you for that. Well, question for Elena. How does one upscale the work in informal settlements around ensuring engagement with local communities? And how does one move some of the good stuff that the organization that you've worked for, Seri, has done at the local level into much wider impact? So how do you scale it up?
Super, thank you. I mean, I think one of the kind of key ways, there are two key ways that really work. The one has been as a result of a court order in another settlement, which is in fact not part of the study outside of Johannesburg. A multidisciplinary task team has been established on which we are a part, which is tasked with, it has provincial and local housing officials, water, sanitation, informal settlement residents, the community leaders, etc., some practitioners in it. And what that does is it means we can, including urban planners, is that we've started to set out a model that can be used and taken up around how do you develop an in situ layout plan for upgrading an informal settlement. So I think that, and there's plenty of experience from other supporters too in Cape Town and others, where people are working closely with residents and with governments and with urban planners to ensure that we can get in situ upgrading happening. Anyone who's an urban planner knows that upgrading and improving on existing infrastructure is a difficult thing. It is much easier to flatten shacks and start again. To really work with structures and to meaningfully build on what exists is creative urban planning, and it takes proper design. And those kinds of experiences need to be developed. Working in grey areas, which is not greenfields development, is difficult and requires creative design and architecture, and a lot of collaboration, and a lot of patience. So I think this model of kind of instant solutions has to be addressed first and foremost, that this is an iterative and creative process that involves very deep engagement to do it properly. And that's the one thing around scaling up. And the other one is working in multiple ways on multiple fronts using multiple strategies. So it's not just about putting social accountability pressure or litigation or advocacy, or it's not one single strategy, it's multiple strategies on multiple fronts, working both with and against government to get everybody moving, and then to work slowly and painstakingly in doing the actual upgrading, bringing in the experts needed. Thank you, and documenting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. Before I let you go, we heard from Engineer Jacobia that low-income areas are part and parcel of the utility service area, and any plan by the utility that does not include these areas for whatever reason is not legitimate. Any quick reaction to that?
I mean, I think that may be true in theory, but certainly in our experience in practice, what happens is that the grants and the resources used for upgrading informal settlements are not utilized by municipalities. It's much easier to go and develop housing in greenfield areas and to move people into those areas than it is to actually upgrade people where they live and protect their livelihoods. So we see that may be true in our legislation and policy too, but to actually do that takes quite some doing, and is not as frequently implemented as we'd like. Thank you, Umubrik.
Thank you, Alana. And I come to Bill now. Bill, you've done research on the topic of integrity in the sanitation sector, looking at the case of Lusaka. So from this research, could you speak to some institutional challenges that you feel opened up gaps for corruption, malpractice, integrity failures, and how do you think those could be addressed?
Okay. Thank you, Umberk, and sorry that I disappeared. Internet challenges don't appear to be excluding England anyway at the moment. Regarding that, I'd say one of the main challenges that we see in urban sanitation regulation, from the service provision side anyway, and there's lots of different angles that you can look at this, is around the decentralization of service provision that we see for the urban sanitation sector. So as Yvonne was mentioning earlier, around 80 to 85% of services are off-site sanitation services, and these are typically provided by a very small number, no, a very large number, sorry, of a very fragmented group of service providers. And that creates a natural challenge for any regulator if they're going to regulate these, compared to if you've got one large utility operating across a whole region of a country. And this is a key challenge that we see also in the rural water supply sector as well, for example. It's very hard to talk about meaningful regulation if you're having to regulate 1,000, 2,000 different entities. It's much easier if you can consolidate that into, say, 10, 20 groups of service providers, but you can then focus on it in a much more meaningful way. So I would say that's one overarching, much broader challenge that is realistically going to need to be addressed before we can make truly meaningful progress in regulating the urban sanitation sector.
Thank you, Bill. That is probably a challenge in many other countries. So a little bit more research needed to understand the depth of this problem. Paul had mentioned the importance of monitoring. Could I ask Yvonne, so this is the last question in the Q&A session, to speak further to the importance of monitoring?
Thank you, Umberk. And like you said, Paul raised a very compelling and very valid point on the issues of monitoring. And from the regulatory standpoint, the regulator institutes several eyes for monitoring service provision on the ground. And it is important, as Bill has just said, when you have a single authority that is accountable and holds a license for a particular area, then you can actually enforce certain things much easier. But when the sector is so fragmented with so many providers, how then do you enhance monitoring to ensure that the service really is being delivered as you have set out in certain standards? So monitoring relies also on the regulator itself going down to do inspections, but also the consumer voice becomes very key in the regulatory space, because then when you hear back directly from the consumers, you have an assurance that the provider is actually delivering on its mandate. So the two combined really makes monitoring much easier, and therefore you can hold certain entities to account at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. And that brings our Q&A session to the end. So we have a few minutes left, and I would like to use that opportunity to give the floor to Barbara Schein for some final remarks. So Barbara is Executive Director of the Water Integrity Network, and she has over 20 years experience in water management in developing countries, with a focus on good governance and addressing poverty, inequality, gender, and other forms of social and economic marginalization. And Barbara serves as a member of a number of boards that are active in the sector. Barbara, over to you.
Thanks very much, Umubrik. And let me begin by saying thank you very much to our speakers and panelists. It's been an incredibly interesting session. I hope that the people who were listening in and asking questions of us have enjoyed it as much as I have and have learned as much as I have. I think it was a very useful and interesting spread of input that came in. When we talk about integrity, we usually talk about it being premised on 4 pillars, which are transparency, accountability, participation, and anti-corruption activities. And in the course of the discussion that has happened over the last hour, we've had all of those highlighted, and highlighted very much around the context of informal settlements in particular, which became a critical part of the discussion. And so, for example, the whole question of monitoring has come up as an incredibly important issue. There cannot be transparency and there cannot be accountability without monitoring. If you don't know what you're talking about, I mean, Mpho talked about knowing how many taps and toilets. Without that information, service providers can't be held accountable, and there can be no transparency around what is actually happening, whether there is progress or not progress. So I mean, I think the other thing that came out of very clearly about what Mpho was saying, but also what Alana referred to, and what Yvonne talked to, I think the comment from Yvonne was, with no regulation, there is no consumer voice. The whole notion of participation, and in relation to informal settlements, how, you know, we talk about this phrase of putting people at the center. It's an often used phrase, but the reality of what that means in terms of informal settlements, recognizing the agency, the legitimacy of people who are living in informal settlements, and the recognition of people in informal settlements as being a critical part of the urban landscape. The fact that you live in an informal settlement in no way undermines your ability to contribute to the urban fabric, the economy, and the social environment of the urban fabric. And it's important to actually recognize that, and then to engage with the people living in informal settlements, and enable them to be part of their own decisions. I was interested by the comment from Engineer Gakubia, who talked about the fact that no plan from a utility that doesn't deal with informal settlements is a valid plan, has legitimacy. But unfortunately, it is the reality that in a number of areas, that is exactly what we see. And what is needed, and I think what came out for me from this session, is there's the top-down process, the voice from the ground, the kind of work that Mpho was talking about, that Vigilantes has been doing, etc., which is the voice from the ground, but also the voice of the regulator, saying that this is what is, you know, that here are the parameters, and actually dealing with the provision of decent services in informal settlements is a regulatory requirement that you have to meet. I mean, I think what we need to recognize is that there is an enormous role for integrity, improving integrity in the water and in the sanitation sector. That improving integrity will go a long way to contributing to an improvement in the delivery of services. It's not a miracle silver bullet, but it is an important part of contributing to the delivery of improved services, particularly to informal settlements. I think what strikes me in this discussion is that from the Water Integrity Network, the discussion around water has been integrity in water has been a much deeper and longer discussion than around sanitation. I think we have a much longer way to go in terms of really understanding integrity in sanitation. And the challenge, the numbers that Yvonne put on the table of 2.1 to 2.6 billion people who have on-site sanitation, and the challenges of regulating on-site sanitation, the challenges of regulating the millions of small service providers around on-site sanitation. And of course, there are small service providers in water as well, but I think it's the order of magnitude in the sanitation sector puts particular challenges to us. So I think on that note, I would just like to thank the speakers for a really, really interesting discussion. and for one from which I have myself learned quite a lot. And let's take this forward. Let's recognize that in the sanitation governance issue, the issue of integrity is a critical one. Transparency, accountability, participation, anti-corruption, they're all going to make a difference in how we can actually deliver services, decent services to the people who need them.
And thank you, Barbara, for the great summary of the session. And we also thank the participants for the questions. We all hope you have found the session useful, and please get in touch with us if you are working in this field and if you are championing integrity for better sanitation service provision in your areas. Thank you again, and goodbye for now.